Hello, everyone. Hi, it's Rob. Rob here. How's it going? It is just me again this episode. And, you know, sometimes when I do these solo episodes, I try to do some kind of bit or like fun little intro or something different or interesting or silly. And I gotta be honest, I got nothing today. I got nothing. I got no ideas. I've just been sitting here in front of my recording program for like the last 5 minutes thinking, how am I going to open this podcast? What am I going to do? And this is all I got. This is all I got. But I do have a really great conversation coming up with Alex, a.k.a. Barbarism Critic, a.k.a. Scarlet Red, who you might know from Twitter. Really good conversation about Biden's speech this week, where he basically doubled down on this insinuation that these pro-Palestine encampments and these student movements are somehow violent and anti-Semitic, and basically leading to a 1930s Germany kind of climate on college campuses, because there's students that are protesting the mass slaughter that he's been fully supporting over the last 7 months. You know, we talked about that. We talked about, you know, who is worthy of empathy and sympathy and humanity and who isn't. And we talked about this sort of sleight of hand that the Biden administration is trying to pull off right now with Rafah, trying to kind of suggest that there's some kind of a red line that they're putting in place, trying to differentiate themselves from what the right wants, when really there's very little separation or difference between these kind of two positions. And this whole strategy that they're taking right now with Rafah is really an illusion anyways. There really are no red lines being put in place, even if that's the kind of message that they're trying to send, either directly or through their allies in the media. So great conversation coming up with Alex. Please, of course, subscribe to the podcast if you can. Jordan and I, who I'm speaking for in absentia today, we love doing this show. We do 2 episodes of this podcast each and every week. If you want to get access to every single episode, please subscribe for $5 at insurgentspod.com. Jordan spoke to Emma Vigland of the Majority Report in the previous episodes. You can get access to that and a whole bunch of other really fantastic bonus episodes that we've done. So please subscribe if you can. And I think that's everything. I don't know. I don't really have anything to report. It's been a pretty tame week over here. I'm watching the NBA playoffs. I'm relaxing. I'm parenting, talking to my son about all the various ideas for TV shows and cartoons and action figure tie-ins that he has. We've been going over a lot of that, you know? That's all. That's all that's going on. I hope you're doing well. How are you doing? We never talk anymore. I hope you're doing well. Okay. You know what? Let's move past this riveting opening segment here and get to this conversation with Alex. I think you're going to like it. And she's going to be joining the show right after this. And now we're joined by Alex. You might know Alex from Twitter as Barbarism Critic. She's an organizer, has been part of the Palestine movement, the campus activity that we've been seeing lately. Alex, thank you for joining me. Thanks for talking to me. How's it going?
It's good. Thanks for having me on.
It's my pleasure. Before we get to the serious discourse, I do have one question I wanted to ask you, which is maybe even more serious than anything else that's going to be discussed this evening. But Alex, we ask everyone this question, and now it's time to hear your answer to this question of, are you a gamer?
I am a gamer. Yes, I am.
Okay, that's cool. What are you playing anything different lately? What do you got going?
I'm playing Final Fantasy VII right now.
Okay.
On
The
PS5.
remaster?
Yeah. the rebirth or something, I
Okay.
guess.
I never played the original. I'm old enough that I had the original PlayStation, but I was never like into the role-playing games, the turn-based games, but it seems like
Yeah,
it really
I've
has
never
this devoted fandom.
I've never played a Final Fantasy game. I bought Dragon's Dogma and I got really pissed off after like 3 days and I was like,
Okay.
forget this. So I bought Final Fantasy and it's great. It's really a good game. I see what the hype is about. And now I understand what people are talking about when they talk about Sephiroth posting. So
Yeah, yeah, the thing when you get in an argument online with someone,
yeah.
start talking like Sephiroth. Yeah, I've heard. I know about more from that than the actual game. Isn't it about like an evil corporation that's destroying the environment and everything too?
It's kind of anti-capitalist and so like Shinra's the bad guys and then the group Avalanche is the group that Cloud Strife, the main character, is part of, and they get labeled terrorists like immediately in
Huh.
this, and I'm like, interesting. But yeah, like I mean, they blow up reactors and stuff, so it technically is terrorism, but it's also interesting because there is some kind of like parallel politics.
Yeah, which is funny because it's like according to these like weird reactionary gaming guys, it's like when did everything became woke in like 2015? Prior to that, there was no political messages about society or our economy or gender or any of these things. This is a very recent phenomenon.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's the same thing as like people discovering every 3 months that Rage Against the Machine isn't conservative.
Yeah, that will never get tired. I'll never get tired of that. Um, well, Alex, I wanted to bring you on the show this evening to talk about, well, I mean, everything that's been happening over the last couple of weeks. But more people are calling you the Aaron Rupar of the left now. You're clipping
Oh, no.
speeches. You're going viral, clipping speeches. No, but like, I know you've been, really heavily involved in a lot of these conversations that have been going on, and I thought it was important to kind of talk a little bit about Biden's speech that he gave the other day, that you did, post some clips from online, particularly where he talks about it. So this is about, this was tied into like Holocaust Remembrance Day, but of course it became more about like anti-Israel protesters than like anything that actually happened during the Holocaust. And weirdly enough, as well, talking about the Holocaust and then pivoted to talking about, Palestinians, Hamas, and kind of making a broader generalization about like Arabs, talking about these
Mhm.
ancient hatreds they have towards the Jews, which is weird, I think, to do on a Holocaust Remembrance Day, which was a genocide that was perpetrated by Europeans and where anti-Semitism was a largely European problem and North American and Canada and the United States as well. So it was weird, I think, to see him pivot from talking about the Holocaust to like blaming Arabs and Palestinians for anti-Semitism. But yeah, I was just wondering, what your thoughts were about Biden's speech and how he's been sort of engaging with this over the last 7 months.
Yeah, so like with the speech, I just started watching it and it kicked off like so badly that I was like, oh my God, like I have to clip the worst parts of this out. Like I'm not somebody that usually does that, but I just like I know that like the Aaron Rupar type people aren't gonna catch like the ancient hatred like
Yeah.
that, that or ancient desires is what he said to
Okay. Yeah.
eliminate Jews. Like they're not going to catch those things, and like that's to me was just spoke so much to like the mentality of Biden, but also the State Department. Like you saw Matt Miller defending those words, and saying like, no, that's demonstrably true, even though Hamas is younger than I am. um but I just was like, people have to see this because I mean, Biden is stuck in, when he met Golda Meir. He's back then and he hasn't like progressed his views. There's not a group of Arabs he hasn't ever wanted to bomb. And the actual ancient bigotry is like the ancient bigotry of Biden towards Arabs and Muslims, and then of course like European anti-Semitism, which is ancient. But But yeah, his whole orientation towards the protesters has been appalling. I don't see much of a difference between the stuff that he says about protesters and the stuff that Trump said, except that I will grant that Trump said there's fine people on both sides.
Yeah.
And you're not really getting that from Biden. It's
No,
just that, protesters are violent.
they're basically Nazis.
Yeah, exactly. And actually, when that speech started, he started with like this, the story of the Holocaust, but you could tell that he was working his way up to like drawing a parallel between like the Holocaust and like, this idea that there's like pogroms on campus, which is just completely absurd and so far from the truth. Um, and, like in my experience, which I have, been a part of like the University of Vermont encampment, helping them as much as I could with my org. But, in my experience and over the last 7 months with, I've been to, dozens of protests at this point. Jewish people have a huge like part in these things. Jewish Voice for Peace, especially, has been really active, like in all of these things, and they just get completely written out of the conversation. And it's so grotesque to me that like a Catholic president is like erasing these people, if not smearing them as anti-Semitic. But like the not even really acknowledging their existence, because if you acknowledge the existence of anti-Zionist Jews, it kind of destroys the entire argument. And then it is about colonialism and imperialism and the things that it actually is about.
Yeah, I mean, it's just been really grotesque the way that like you saw Dana Bash on CNN make this case, you see Biden making this case, and basically taking these students who are protesting for Palestine. They're horrified by the genocide that they're seeing. They're horrified by the images of dead kids that they're seeing, and basically, framing them as being the new Nazis. This is the climate on these campuses where these Jewish students are being harassed and blocked from going to class, which every single time you can look into these cases and you'll find some guy that did a tour with the IDF and now is back in the United States making this big scene about how they feel unsafe and uncomfortable. And then, of course, it gets this big national media cycle. There was that woman who got like stabbed in the eye with the flag when she got like lightly brushed against, and like these incidents get held up as this evidence that there's this climate of anti-Semitism, and it's basically, yeah, like Dana Bash was saying, it's the climate. It's just like 1930s Germany. This is how scary it is. But meanwhile, like you point out, you have Jewish students that are involved in these encampments and have been involved in all these protests. There's been big actions in like Grand Central Station and in NYC and all around the world. That's where Jewish people are directly implicated in that. And then so when they get the shit beat out of them by heavily armored riot cops or by like Israel supporting brown shirts, civilians that just go in and start fighting these protesters, then we don't really want to talk about the safety of these Jewish students on campus. We don't really want to even acknowledge that, even that that's an issue. Like you said, once you do, then the whole thing totally falls apart. But I just think that difference is so stark. Like when we're worried about, when we're really fear mongering about, Jewish safety on college campuses, and Jewish students are part of the front lines of this movement and are facing serious violence, to say nothing of like the threats to their their futures and their security that they're kind of facing as well. But they're just not part of that conversation. It's really amazing to me.
Yeah, I think one of the biggest and like most stark conflations that you keep seeing is the concept of like feeling unsafe and being unsafe, right? Like those are two different things. I can feel unsafe because like I got mugged one time. And so now I can feel unsafe sitting in my bed. That doesn't mean that I'm unsafe. And this idea that just because like, for example, Shai Davidai, the Columbia professor who is like harassing and doxing all his students says he feels unsafe. Like that doesn't make him unsafe. The idea that we're just saying that like, oh, if a Zionist feels unsafe, that means that there's violence and they're unsafe. Meanwhile, I live in Burlington, Vermont, which is the place that three young men were shot for wearing keffiyeh, and one is paralyzed from the waist down. There was a child that was stabbed by the landlord of his mother for being Muslim. The actual climate is unsafe for Palestinians, Muslims, and Arabs. The actual climate is unsafe for anybody that stands in solidarity. You have bill after bill after bill, all of a sudden, especially like right now, targeting Muslims, targeting Arabs, targeting students, targeting faculty that supports them, targeting protesters like me, threatening to put us on no-fly list, and this like crazy one that just came out threatening to send us all to Gaza, which is basically saying like we will execute you with the bombs that you pay for out of your own taxes in Gaza.
They're kind of acknowledging that it is a war zone that's being funded by the U.S.
Yeah. And so like and also, of course, like the daily barrage of images that are coming out of Gaza of people's, children's legs blown off and things like that. That's unsafe. Those people are unsafe. People on campus that feel uncomfortable because they're having to confront their complicity in an atrocity. That doesn't make you unsafe. That makes you uncomfortable. And that's all I'm seeing. And, it's just, it couldn't be clearer that, that like the old saying that right now applies to like Zionists versus anti-Zionists is that there's people who the law protects and does not bind, and there's people who the law binds and does not protect. Right now with Biden, for example, constantly saying things that are not violent are violent. He's saying, like he just said in an interview that there's hate speech on campus and hate speech is illegal. Okay, no, it's not. First of all, it's not illegal. This is, otherwise arrest like everybody at the Daily Wire. But there isn't hate speech on campus. Like, for the vast majority, I'm sure you could find an instance anywhere. But there's not hate speech on campus, but also it's not violence. Also, property destruction is not violence. And there's constantly that conflation of property destruction being violence. If I break a chair, that's not violence. I'm sorry, it's not. And then the actual violence of sending in like, the stormtroopers into Columbia, suddenly that's not violence. That's order. That's maintaining order. So, and I think like a lot of people, not just me, a lot of people I know have said they felt like they feel like they're going crazy because, like all these, like up is down, down is up. You have the vast majority of people are seeing what's happening. And then you're being told by the politicians, by the State Department, by the media that it's not happening, that you're not seeing what you're seeing. They're saying nonsensical things 7 months into this. They're still saying that, Hamas is using human shields. And it's like, well, I don't know. If it's me and I'm trying to use a human shield and they shoot through the first shield, I'm not going to spend 7 months doing the same thing because like that obviously didn't work, right? So like how could they still be using human shields if Israel has made it plain that they will bomb anyone and everyone and like indiscriminately? It's like so you're constantly hearing just lies after lies after lies after lies, like direct to your face and trying to criminalize you for protesting this stuff and acting like you're a terrorist for calling for peace and that you're violent for calling for peace. And, it's starting to make people feel like they live in like a bizarro world on reality.
No, I mean, I know the feeling well. Anyone that's been plugged into this conversation for the last 7 months knows this feeling well. And that's the thing. It's like it's different because we're about any issue. You can look at mainstream media and you can see the distortions. You can see the fake news. You can see the manipulation tactics and the consent manufacturing and all this stuff. But I think what you're describing too, and what we've been seeing over the last couple of months is like literally like the media class and the political class kind of like collaborating on creating this totally alternate version of reality and operating from this version of reality that like we just don't feel connected to. You look around and it just feels like completely different from the reality that these people are kind of describing. And it does have this really fucked up effect on your brain. It just makes you question your reality. I mean, it's funny because like we started getting into like the therapy speak when it comes to like politics and like gaslighting and all that stuff, and I think that became really overused during the Trump era, just to describe like basic lies. Like it's not, the lying is a different thing, but like it is what it is. Like that is what it is, right? It's like it's intentionally misleading people with the deliberate effort of making them question their own sense of reality and their own perception. Like that's the sort of textbook definition of what gaslighting is. And like that's what the Joe Biden administration is doing right now. And that's what the media is fully complicit in as well. And you're right. It has this bizarre effect when you're living through it and trying to resist it, because it's just the reality that these folks are describing just feels completely foreign and alien to what you can observe just by looking around.
Yeah, and I don't think it's even like just people that are hyper online or anything. In my experience, like this issue has touched a lot more of like the sort of like, progressive liberal base, like not like the hardcore partisan liberals that are like, basically in a cult for Joe Biden. But, I have a lot of people that have come out, out to event after event after event, and educational events that we've done and things like that as well, because their idea of like what they thought this country was, what they thought, the Democratic Party was, all of it is, has just like collapsed around them. And then they see the media lying to them and the politicians and all this. And it's, in a way, I want to thank them because they're delegitimizing their entire project before our eyes. And I don't think I've ever seen anything this blatant in my entire life. They always lie. The media always lies about things,
Yeah.
but it's not. It's just so like these people are so high up on their perches, and they're so like out of touch with the majority of people that they have no idea how insane they sound to the average person that has like even like their slightest finger on the pulse of what's going on.
Yeah, I mean, I think that's one interesting phenomenon right now is you can kind of sense this palpable kind of panic coming from the ruling class because they realize that they're losing people. They're losing grip on this like narrative that they've had very strict control over for a really long time. And more people, especially younger people, are all of a sudden completely rejecting this. And I think a lot of this stuff, like, well, we should ban TikTok then. We should make it illegal to say anything bad about Israel. We should start sending, and like all these kind of ludicrous solutions. Like it really feels like none of these are things that are actually going to address the issue that these folks have, which is that the fact that like the narrative that they've promoted is no longer really connecting with people, and everything that they're doing is this really like reactionary response, which is only going to like feed into all the exact same things that is kind of radicalizing people right now. Um, I wanted to talk also about, because you talked about how the Bidens, his career and when it comes to Arabs and Muslims, and I thought it was really interesting in another interview he gave recently with Erin Burnett, when she kind of pointedly asked him about the tens of thousands of dead kids in Palestine that have been killed in this conflict. And that's the thing that for so many people that's been unbelievably horrifying. Obviously, it's unacceptable and it's grotesque when any civilian dies, but just the effect that this has had on children, not only children that have been killed, but children that have been maimed and injured, children that have been orphaned, children that are psychologically damaged now for the rest of their lives after experiencing this. And I thought it was really indicative of Biden's whole sort of ethos, where he gets asked about this and asked to try and sort of like come up with some sort of defense for how he's supported this over the last 7 months. And all he could talk about was anti-Semitic protesters, and basically saying like there's violent Nazi protests happening on college campuses, basically. And then pivoted right away to just talking about October 7th. And you don't know the horrible things that happened on October 7th. And and these kind of graphic descriptions of scenes of violence that happened on that day. And it's really clear for all the talk, especially prior to the election, about Biden and his like empathy, this empathy that he has, and this kindness and decency that he has, it's really clear in answers like that, like who he actually considers like worthy of empathy and worthy of these kinds of thoughts, and who has like humanity and who has the right to live and not be victims of this kind of violence, and who doesn't. Like he really just had nothing to say whatsoever about the tens of thousands of children that he's helped kill in Gaza over the last 7 months, and all he can think about are the victims of October 7th, who at this point now it's so disproportionate that it's like it barely even compares to one another. But it was really, I think, really clearly indicative of like who he views as a human being worthy of empathy and who isn't.
Yeah, oh, totally. I mean, there's that story that came out a couple months ago about how when Menachem Begin visited Biden in like the early 80s, he was talking about what to do in Lebanon, and Biden was like, "Yeah, we should hit the women and children too." And he, like even Menachem Begin, who is literally a convicted terrorist, was
Yeah.
like,
Whoa.
yeah,
Yeah.
like maybe not. We're not,
Yeah.
So it's
We don't
always,
say that in English.
yeah, it's always kind of been like his ethos, and there's never been a war, like especially against brown people, that he did not fully support. I mean, whether it's a war here against the black people in this country, or a war somewhere else against brown people.
Yeah.
But then there's also been like the leaks that have been coming out of state that were saying that it was clear that he was like completely unbothered when he was given reports of what was happening to Palestinian children, and like the numbers of people that were dead on that side. Like it was just like his eyes would glaze over, and it just couldn't be more clear in policy. It couldn't be more clear in the way he speaks. There was recently like some thing where they caught him getting off the helicopter, and like he was like, "Yeah, I'm concerned about anti-Semitism and also people that don't understand what's going on with the Palestinians." And it's like, like he can't even
Yeah.
bring
Thank you,
himself to
sir.
act like he gives a shit, not at
Yeah.
all. And it's really, the PR people that did Biden's 2020 campaign deserve some kind of award for getting us all to, not us all, but, like
Yeah.
the vast majority of people to buy into this, friendly old grandpa with empathy. I mean, even before this happened, it became clear to me that Biden has empathy for the people he's individually met. And that's like it.
Yeah.
Like anybody that's outside of like 1 foot in front of him, he doesn't really actually have any empathy for whatsoever. And he never has. He's been a 50-year career of literally supporting the worst things in this country that
I
have
mean,
us all.
he's literally on record in his speech prior to the election being like, young people are complaining right now. I have no empathy for it. He's literally said those exact words, the Mr. Empathetic president, which is kind of funny in and of itself. But so not only do you have Biden and the Democratic administration calling these protesters basically Nazis, like that's what they're doing. Like it's like, I don't know any other simpler way to describe that. Just likening the climate on college campuses right now to like Nazi Germany, um, and which is totally bipartisan, like in full agreement with the Republicans' stance on this. If maybe the Republicans are saying it in slightly more forceful terms or whatever. But so you have that line coming from Biden and the Biden administration. But then, of course, they've got the whole Democratic Party good cop, bad cop thing. So you have Biden calling them Nazis, and then who showed up today was Hillary Clinton. Hillary Clinton showed up today on Morning Joe to call them stupid. So they're not Nazis. They're simply ignorant kids who have no notion of history and no notion of anything about the Middle East. They don't understand what they're doing. They don't understand what they're talking about. So I just think this is a great strategy, outreach strategy for the Democratic Party to reach out to these young people that are disaffected and disillusioned and unsure about voting for Democrats, call them Nazis or stupid. And
Oh,
I'm
yeah.
sure that's going to bring these people right back into the fold, and they're going to realize the error of their ways.
Oh, totally. I love that they trot her out once a month to tell us all to go fuck ourselves. It's so awesome. Like it's literally like clockwork, once a month she tells a group of voters like eat shit and die. And then
Yeah.
like And then they put her back in her house, and then she comes back a month later, picks a new group of voters, and tells us you're fucking morons. And then like they put her back, and it's awesome. It's like the amount of hubris this woman has, like unearned confidence that she has after like never winning anything, losing to the biggest clown on the face of the earth, is just, it's insane that they would even, I don't know that they want to win this election or that they care that much. I don't know that they're necessarily trying to lose, but I don't think they're trying to win. It doesn't come off that way to me at all. You know, I don't see much campaigning going on. It just really feels like we're going to do our agenda, get it done, and whatever happens, happens. I'm not going to, you know, like Israel's more important. My agenda is more important. Like, we'll just like the chips fall where they may. I don't see any attempt to reach out to the youth except for that god awful, they use the like BBL Jersey track or whatever to you see that.
But they're putting out TikToks as well, even while trying to ban it at the same time. So that's going to really, I'm sure that's going to go over well. No, it's kind of what I've been saying. It's like there's all kinds of people trying to lecture folks about what needs to happen or who needs to vote for who, or you know, how anything just helps Trump or whatever, but it's kind of inescapable to conclude that they're just doing everything that they can to ensure that that's the exact outcome that happens. I wanted to talk about the Canadian angle as well, because like this has been kind of like a kind of like a united front here over the last couple of days, going after these college protests to talk about this climate of anti-Semitism and stuff. A lot of it was because of the Holocaust Remembrance Day that was going on, but Trudeau made some interesting comments that I also thought were kind of interesting to break down, where he's defending the idea of being a Zionist, saying it shouldn't be a dirty word. It shouldn't be something that should be criticized for. All it is simply believing in the right of Jewish people to have self-determination. You know, that's all it is. And I think that's kind of an interesting rhetorical strategy in and of itself, because it's like, yeah, if you just describe it as something totally the opposite of what it is, and you describe it as this benign, nice thing, yeah, it doesn't really sound that bad. Okay. But in practice, in reality, that is not at all what it is. It's not simply the right for Jewish people to have self-determination. It's fundamentally linked with genocide and ethnic cleansing and apartheid and dehumanization and occupation and all the things that we've seen over decades and decades and decades. So I've seen this kind of strategy employed on a number of levels, where the reality of Zionism is totally diluted and it's described as this very kind of like nice, kind of wholesome thing. Which, yeah, if you do that, then it doesn't sound so bad, but that's like not really at all what they're describing. He also said, you know, you can be a Zionist and also believe firmly in a two-state solution where Palestinians can live in safety and security alongside Israel. And again, it's just like, that's just not true. I mean, you can say that as if it's a fact, but the reality of that is there's not a possibility of a two-state solution, because you can just hear from any Israeli official about their feelings of it. They're not interested in having a two-state solution. They've never been interested in having that. That's what these decades of illegal settlements have been about, like ensuring that will never, ever come to fruition. So I just thought that was interesting, a couple of statements from Trudeau, where he's just basically, again, presenting a totally alternate version of reality and asking us to accept these kind of ideas. But the version of reality that he's presenting is completely at odds from the actual material reality that anyone has been able to observe over the last 7 months or over the last several decades.
Yeah. I actually saw somebody recently like describe Zionism as the most successful anti-colonial project in history.
Yeah, man. Yeah.
Just like,
when you start getting in that kind of language,
like Lord Balfour, the famous anti-colonialist. But you know, the idea that like some ancient claim from 2,000 years ago to the land gives you the right to murder and displace people, throw them off their land, and then occupy them for 75 years is patently insane. And the idea that we can do ethno states in 2024 is patently insane. And I don't think it would land if we tried to do another all-white ethno state or something like that. Like, we know that's bad, right? We did that with South Africa and it was bad. And people can see that. But because of like the Holocaust, people think, well, you know, so Jewish people need to be safe. But whenever you have a state where you need to maintain a demographic majority, there's no way to do that without violence. This isn't like some like fairy tale world where like people can have like their ethno state, but like somehow like it just happens that way. It just works out that way. Like it has to be enforced through violence. And that's the antithesis of like a free, well, it's certainly the antithesis of a democracy, but it's definitely not self-determination. What about the self-determination of the people who you kicked out of their houses and still have their keys? Even the two-state solution thing is delusional. Look at the West Bank. I mean, there's your two-state solution. Like, where they're literally mowing down homes with bulldozers right now. The only way this is going to work is a secular democracy. That is the only way it's going to work, and it's going to have to be like a lot of struggle to get there, but that's literally the only thing that can possibly work, because you can't what are you going to give back to Palestinians at this point, right? Like a bunch of like, that's the one thing that Hillary Clinton said was like, she talked about like a deal that was given to Yasser Arafat or something. And I might be incorrect here, but I'm pretty sure that was the deal where it was like a bunch of spots of land, like all around, like that.
Like no people on earth would have accepted that deal that she's
right. It was like nothing was contiguous. There's no way to have a state that way. Like it's just impossible.
They're also a lot of the time in the American ruling class and Canadian ruling class, when they talk about this hypothetical Palestinian state, it's like, oh, it's this like demilitarized kind of state. So basically it's like, changing the rhetoric a little bit and maybe changing a few small things, but keeping the exact same system in place. A land that's completely dominated by a heavily militarized Israel with this quote unquote state.
It's the Palestinians. Like if any country on this earth needs a military, it's the Palestinians. It's so obvious at this point. And to me, like I think too, like that's where people get, like Hamas is a terrorist group, this and that. Hamas is like the fighting resistance that these people have. That's what they have instead of a military. They wouldn't exist if they were allowed to have a military. There'd be a military. But like,
and also worth
utterly defenseless is crazy.
Also worth pointing out, there's been a number of other like secular Palestinian organizations that have been systematically dismantled and destroyed and undermined at every turn. Yep. And that's just what they're left with.
There's like the PFLP, which actually is part of, the resistance with Hamas, and the DFLP and, and the PIJ, like there's a whole bunch of groups that are actually part of the resistance now. But the idea that all that has to be dismantled, and that keeps being part of these ceasefire deals. Like, oh, Hamas dismantle and turn themselves in. And it's like, so leave these people with like absolutely no defense against, a nuclear power that is pretending not to be a nuclear power that has the backing of the most powerful country in the world. That's crazy. I mean, they're already, getting picked off. Their kids are getting picked off at 11 years old for throwing a rock or whatever, or getting thrown in an Israeli prison for 20 years for throwing a rock. And now we're going to say, like, no, you have to be even more defenseless than we've currently let you be. And I just don't think that that's something. If I said that about Ukraine, right, like the same people that are saying Hamas should just dismantle and blah, 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 would never think that's acceptable, right? But because it's Palestinians, it's allowed. And I think, this country needs to confront its racism, its Islamophobia. Yeah. It's just, it's so obvious.
For the people that have been, so adamant about the need to support NATO and support this nonstop flow of arms to Ukraine and support this proxy war, which is what it is and what it has always been. But when you point out the kind of like nefarious elements as part of that organized resistance, they say, well, they're resisting oppression, they're resisting occupation, so we got to give them weapons, and we'll sort all that out later. So it's interesting how certain people are willing to look the other way about certain beliefs that they might find distasteful when it comes to certain geopolitical situations versus others. And I think this can make people kind of uncomfortable to talk about, but it's just basically discussing the reality of what that means to be in that situation and like the means of resistance that you have. It's not about like supporting or not supporting. It's just acknowledging that basic reality.
I mean, people have literally under the Geneva Convention having a right for armed struggle when they're occupied. And, That's something that we're pretending doesn't exist when it comes to Palestinians for some reason. But we recognize it with slave revolts. We recognize it like in every other instance, we recognize it with Haiti, with all these other colonial projects. We recognize like in retrospect that these people had an absolute right to resist their oppressors. But when it's this situation, so suddenly it's different. Like suddenly this universal precept doesn't apply. And I'm sorry, that's the human spirit. You cannot subjugate people for decades and decades and expect them not to fight back. If you want them to stop fighting back, you have to actually like let them be free. That's it.
It's basically the history of like every single anti-colonial struggle like throughout history. But I guess going back to also something that Trudeau was saying, this idea of like, you can be a liberal Zionist, I guess. And I guess that's one thing that over the last 7 months, I think has become increasingly untenable. And I think prior to this like campaign starting, this genocide starting, that was maybe still, even that's something that I don't agree with and I find kind of inconsistent or incoherent. I think it was still kind of possible to take this position. Oh, I'm liberal, I'm progressive. Of course, I support Israel's right to defend itself and two-state solution and all that stuff. And that's one thing that I feel like no one is really accepting anymore. When people try to use this kind of language or this rhetoric that in the past has been the kind of like, here are the words that you have to say to signal that you have these progressive values, but you still don't want to upset any kind of status quo. It just seems to be not really possible anymore. And that I think is sort of animating this freak out that we're seeing, because it's like they recognize that this like something has really been lost, especially with this coming generation, and that no one is going to allow them to continue to kind of talk out of both sides of their mouth about this, or pretend to have progressive values, or pretend to care about human rights or freedom of the press or women's rights or LGBTQ rights or whatever, while they support this like apartheid occupation and support arming this like violent militaristic ethno state. It's like it just doesn't really feel like it's possible for people to take this position anymore.
Oh yeah, I mean, you keep seeing it with like Jill Filipovic, Jonathan Chait, Hillary Clinton, trying to like still maneuver in that space, and it just falls so flat. Like there's literally a genocide going on, and you guys are mostly silent on that. But they'll be like, no, but we don't like Netanyahu. Like you're literally supporting his project right now. Like his genocide. But you don't like Netanyahu, or oh well, we don't like the settlers. These kind of things. But I think also that's a lot of why they've been leaning so heavily on this like Hamas mass sexual violence on October 7th thing. That's like absolutely no
and
merit.
They won't let it go despite the fact that there's zero evidence whatsoever to support any of these claims that they're making.
Yeah, and I think a lot of it is just because like that's all they have to cling to like be like, no, like, we're feminists and we care about women and you don't care about women. And, like it's like the tiniest cudgel, but it's like all they have. And there is just no way to support a kinder, gentler genocide or a kinder, gentler apartheid. It is just those two things are incongruent. Either you support people's freedom or you don't. And I think, it's been really mask off for a lot of people. And I think that makes them horribly uncomfortable. People like Jill Filipovic, like they love to like say like what great feminists they are and this and that. And, like barely has anything to say about the genocide, has a lot more to say about like what you don't like the protesters doing or saying. Jonathan Chait just wrote an article basically saying that it's like anti-Semitic to not let Zionists in your encampments. Just like what? They're just trying to find like all these angles, and it just keeps falling flat because it's absurd. And when you're faced with this kind of like the full force of like what the Zionist entity actually is and is about, which is what we're seeing now. Like, as much as I've hated Israel for years, but like even I am like, aghast at this.
Yeah,
and
no, it's really above and beyond.
Yeah. And I think like being faced with that, like all this kind of like bullshit maneuvering is just falling flat over and over and over again. Like, I'm really mad that you protested that falafel place. Like this is what you're talking about. We have every politician coming out and crying about the falafel place, or every politician crying about like the sign they didn't like, or what, like it's always some bullshit thing that like 2 days later you find out like it actually wasn't exactly what they said. Or walking by a hospital during a protest. That was like another one, and like every politician from Bobby Hochul to like Mayor Adams to, to like a bunch of members of Congress all in unison tweet the same thing about how this is anti-Semitic and this is unsafe and blah, 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 blah. And then it has like nothing to say when police come and brutalize protesters, when the people at UCLA come and beat up, the kids in the encampment and all these shoot fireworks into their encampment. I think like it's just like this desperate like grasping at like some way to have the moral high ground where none exists.
Yeah. I mean, in Canada, we had protesters targeting this large book conglomerate called Indigo Books, because Indigo's CEO Heather Reisman founded this what's called the Hisig Foundation for Lone Soldiers, which basically gives funding for people that want to go just join the IDF and go shoot Palestinians. And this got framed in our media and our political class as being this like targeting this Jewish-owned bookstore with these protests and stuff like that. When this woman literally, funds people like that to just go to Israel and join the IDF and get some money, get some housing, things like that. And that's how it gets described in our media. And this all contributes to this completely like upside down alternate reality thing we were talking about before. We need to talk about Rafah right now and kind of this sort of two-step or this sleight of hand that the Biden administration is doing right now, where they're basically saying, okay, it's been 7 months. We've given you full license to just do whatever. We've funded this genocide. We've sent over the weapons for it. We've rhetorically supported it. We've given you political cover anytime that anything is turned into some scandal or some horror is discovered or the world witnesses it. And now they're saying, okay, this is our red line now. Now we've said you don't go into Rafah. We're cutting off weapons now if you engage in this. And again, the Biden administration is promoting this line. You have like progressive Democrats that are kind of saying, look, Biden's doing something. All our organizing is working, and they're listening to we've been building power, and they're listening to us now. And of course, Republicans and reactionaries are freaking out, saying like Biden is basically Hamas now for even saying anything at all about it, including like Ben-Gvir and like people in the Israeli government saying similar things, which is absolutely incredible. But I think the thing about this story that is kind of inescapable is that this red line is like kind of an illusion. Like it doesn't even really exist. It's kind of like, it seems like Biden trying to draw some distinction between, his policy on this and the Republican version or the Trump version, while he hasn't actually, like, they've sent them already all the weapons that they would possibly ever need to engage in this operation. They've even walked back some of this idea that they're cutting off any weapons at all, and they're getting into this kind of like squabbling about, certain weapons can be used in certain locations or whatever. But it just seems fully like it's just like a kayfabe thing where they want to kind of have some credit. They want to be able to tell these student protesters, okay, you can go home now. You can vote blue because clearly we're the lesser of two evils on this, but there's no real distinction with Biden's policy or Trump's policy or this red line that he's putting down now. And it's not real. Like, it's right. It's like, it's not real at all.
Not at all. There's multiple things. So there's like, first, they already have enough weapons, and that was reported in the Washington Post, I think yesterday. They already have as many weapons as they need to do a full-scale invasion. We've been sending them, hundreds of different weapons transfers over the last 7 months without Congress, which is the even better part. But it was restricted to like smart bombs and like a couple kinds of artillery, I think was like the first thing that they said they were going to halt. So it wasn't everything. And then also Kirby said, well, we're not stopping transferring weapons.
Yeah.
Like we're still going to make sure they have everything they need, blah, 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 blah. And then the other sleight of hand that not everybody caught was that Biden went from saying invading Rafah to invading the population centers in Rafah.
Yeah.
Because of course Rafah already has been invaded. Like that started like 2 days ago. They
It's like
started
a major invasion, but a minor incursion is actually not so bad.
Yeah. And there's no, that's not really a quantifiable thing, right? What's a population center? I mean, we're talking about the most densely populated place on Earth right now. This is 1.7 million people and like a tiny patch of land at this point. And so what is a population center at that point? Like, spell it out. It is just vagary. And I think, I think that like people are desperate for a win, but you're not going to get it through this administration. Like, I just don't think so. I think, this movement has to be more about building power outside of this, of the Democratic Party, outside of the system. Because this is what the system hath wrought. This is what you can get inside the system. And I did see like politicians like AOC like celebrating, see, like, oh, Biden's
working.
listening.
Yeah.
And I'm like, calm down. That's what I said. Because it's like, no, this is not working. Well, the fact like what's working is that we're building a movement of people that are firmly anti-imperialist and are like understanding the stakes of things. What is not working is going to be pressuring an 80-something-year-old man to change his long-standing belief, a racist 80-year-old man to change his long-standing beliefs on Arabs, Muslims, Israel. That's never going to happen. It's been 7 months. I can't believe it's been 7 months, but things would have shifted if they were going to. And I think, we just have to pray to God for some kind of other intervention from another country, that kind of thing. Is, maybe the UN finally gets off his asses and does something, the ICJ, I don't know, but I think
unless it gets invaded by the US military.
Yeah. I mean, like not only has, this destroyed any illusion that the Democratic Party is that different from the Republican Party in so many ways, it has also destroyed the concept of international law before the whole war. And, that couldn't be, right now that we have members of Congress that are threatening the ICC because the ICC wants to put a warrant for Netanyahu. I mean, we have no international law. It's fake. It's fake. It's just like a thing that's propped up to allow the United States to do whatever the hell it wants. And outside of that, like, don't you dare tell us or our vassal states what to do. So, I just don't think we're going to get a big win from Biden. I don't think that's going to happen. I think it would have happened by now. And I think, there's an entire disgusting machine keeping this going. You can see it every time they trot out some asshole from the State Department. Every single time, you can just see that this is like an entrenched group of people that have like some very retrograde ideas about Palestinians, and also like have the idea that, Israel is the most important thing for our strategic interests in the region, which is the reason this whole thing is happening. And that's not going to shift. There's tons of people in the State Department that are supposedly unhappy with this. There's people that quit, and nothing has shifted. But that's why I didn't celebrate when they announced the holding back the one weapon shipment, because I was like, I doubt it. Like, I super doubt it.
Yeah,
I don't think they're going to do anything at this point. Every time, besides leaking to the press that like Biden's super mad this time, like. Outside of that, I just don't see it happening.
Yeah, and that's the thing. Like, this U.S. election is coming up, and it's the same thing in Canada. Well, we're going to be in election season eventually as well. And I would generally like, even though I don't like any of these people in the sort of liberal ruling class in either the Democratic Party or the Liberal Party here in Canada, I don't like Justin Trudeau. I don't like Joe Biden. They don't do enough on climate. They don't do enough on housing. But there are differences. There are differences between the two party. I'm willing to entertain the idea that there's like the lesser of two evils. It's like, no, they're not good, but probably better than the other guys. But I'm totally willing to like understand that argument and say, just that people should engage with politics with that in mind, while also keeping in mind that like none of the problems are really meaningfully being addressed at all. You can make this case to people. Yeah, keep the really bad people out and keep the just regular bad people in. Um, but it's just becoming increasingly hard to make this case now. Like that's the thing. It's like I get it. I'm not this like hardliner about this stuff. You know, I understand this argument, but it's just becoming really difficult to make this case to yourself or anybody that it's like it's that this lesser of two evils strategy really means anything. And people are going to be make their own decisions about what they want to do for that. But I think for a lot of people, especially from this like younger generation that we're seeing, regardless of whatever differences there might be, we've talked about some of the things Biden has done on climate, not nearly enough. There are a few things you can point to. They're like, okay, that's not bad policy, I guess. You're making these efforts to like reindustrialize like certain areas and start building factories for EV batteries or solar panels or whatever. Sure, like that's nowhere near coming close to addressing the actual issue of climate change, but like it's something, it's something you can point to that's different. But I think it's just going to become increasingly difficult for a lot of people, especially young people, even with those differences. Like when it comes to student debt, Biden's done some things on student debt, not enough, but I know people that have like had their student debt canceled. But I think there's a lot of people, I keep going back to this, but I think there's a lot of people that, regardless of any of these differences, are going to say, no, I'm not going to vote for this. I can't support this. I can't like after how they've engaged with this issue, after what they've been part of over the last 7 months, regardless of whatever differences there are, I can't support it. And whatever's going to happen is going to happen. And if Trump does win in November, if we do get faced in Canada with this like reactionary wave election, as much of an effort as there's going to be to like blame entitled young people or blame whoever for not showing up to do their jobs and support these people, it's going to be their own fucking fault for that's the result. And that's the they will never internalize that, of course, but I think that's what I can't escape is that a lot of this liberal ruling class, regardless of whatever differences you might point to with the right or anything like that, are just doing everything that they can to ensure that these people take over all the levers of power in the next coming months and years. So I don't know where that leaves us, but it's not great. It's not a great situation.
Well, it's going well for Joe Biden when the discourse for like a month is about like, should you vote for 99% Hitler versus 100% Hitler?
Yeah, there we go.
Like that's a great sign that your candidate is awesome.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think like for a while I bought into the lesser evil thing, but I think there's like a level of evil that is just you gotta overthrow the system. Like you used to have to organize power and like create like a mass of working people that have power to do something else than this, because either way you're going to hell. It's just like the speed at which you're going to hell. And at this point I can't imagine that like people that had the cops sticked on them, a Democratic, president, mayor, governor, are going to like, be knocking doors for Democrats, are going to be like going to the polls and voting for a Democratic president, and that's on top of the genocide, and then they're like trying to criminalize them and call them terrorists and put them on no-fly lists and, just left, right, and center, attacking your voters. And then, all the people, like in Dearborn and stuff who have lost like 30 family members. And then not only that, are being subject to racial abuse by other Democrats that think that they owe them something and that they have to vote for Joe Biden. None of this is appealing. And there's like almost a way in which, like, I'm not saying Trump would be better because that's obviously not true, but there is a way in which like those people that are berating Muslims right now would be like not doing that and would actually give a shit about this genocide if it wasn't Biden, if it was Trump, right? If the roles were reversed and it was Trump doing this, those liberals would pretend to care, and at least they wouldn't be like racially abusing people. And, it is obscene. It really is obscene. And I don't think I can vote for somebody like genocide aside, because that is already like way past the line of something I'm willing to do. But I also couldn't vote for somebody that's trying to like lock me up for criticizing a foreign country. Like that is so beyond the pale, and we've just crossed the Rubicon. And to me, like we this is real Weimar Germany hours. We're seeing a lot of bipartisan fascism right now between like the crazy bills that are getting passed, and on top of the fervent support for genocide and things like that. And I think there's a blob in the middle of like left and right, like obviously like AOC and them aren't part of it, but there's like a blob of probably the majority, and on the Democratic Party and the Republican Party that are kind of like uniting to crack down, to increase cop funding, to, to surveil you, to criminalize speech, to do all these things, knowing that they're behind in every single swing state, by the way. So knowing that they could be doing all these like fash curious things and then hand the keys to Trump. Locking down the border, so throwing the immigrants under the bus as well. There's just like all these things that it's like it's almost like they're trying to like make it really easy for Trump to do his worst impulses.
Yeah.
And, all of this to me is just like, I don't give a shit about voting at this point. Like either way, vote if you want, but like we shouldn't be knocking doors. We shouldn't be doing anything. We should be building working class power, and we should be figuring out how to do something else, because this is not working. This is only going in one direction, and it's, there's no institutional way to fix it. There's no way to elect enough Democrats. There's no way to like Democrats that like aren't beholden to capital and whatever, that can take over the party. There's no way to get a third party elected. That's just not a possibility. It's not the way our system works at all. There's nothing you can do about the Supreme Court. Like there's just no redress for any of these problems that we have. And we also have like a ticking time bomb in climate. And, it's just like, to me at this point, we've reached like the end of the rope with all this stuff. And we just have to different way, and there's a lot more of us than there is of them. It's just that like we have to figure that out.
Well, that's what all the cop cities are for.
Yes, exactly. And that's that's the response to 2020 with a bunch of cop cities. Like when we asked for the end of police brutality, they're like, oh, so you want 70 cop cities across the country? Yes. That the IDF, we do like a training program like overseas and that kind of thing. And that's also how they're going to deal with climate. So, it's we have hell before us if we don't just like build working class power. And I think that's just the only answer. It's like vote this, vote that, whatever. Like there's no amount of voting. There's no amount of anything besides actually doing things outside of the system to take over the system and get our power back that's going to fix this problem.
Well, that's a good place to leave it. Alex, thanks for coming on the podcast to talk to me about all this stuff. I appreciate it. It's late. We're both old and it's past our bedtimes here, I think. So we're gonna log off for tonight. But thanks again for joining me. Do you want to let everyone know where they can find you on Twitter, or if you want to plug anything else that you're doing?
Scarlet Red on Twitter, a.k.a. Barbarism Critic. I don't really have anything to promote. Just keep spreading awareness, keep coming to protests, just do not give up, because this is really important, and this is where it starts. This isn't where it ends. We're gonna take this world back from the worst people.
Hell yeah. We love it. Okay, I'll talk to you soon.
Bye.